We have today with us Mayor Jim Suttle from Omaha, Mayor Don Plusquellic from Akron, and Mayor Littlefield from Chattanooga. I was interested, Mayor Littlefield, you said that 1 hour after you were elected, the bloggers, excuse me, Mayor Suttle, you said, thank you. Mayor, yeah, I am. They all look alike. You said that 1 hour after you just been inaugurated, you had a tough campaign, you had a strong opponent, but 1 hour after you were sworn in, before you could even get through with your inauguration, the blogging started. And while, as I understand it, we've had 1 millionaire in some cities, you had 6 or 7. Can you talk about your situation?
I think the point to be made here is that there may be an agenda in the public domain, but there are so many hidden agendas behind the recalls, and these are the ones that are being passed over in the conversations. In my case, what started as sour grapes quickly turned into let's keep the chaos alive so this mayor will fall flat on his face as he tries to solve problems, which segued into the Wisconsin-style union busting in Omaha, which segued into the landlords who got very upset when I started cracking down on code violations that have been left to no attention whatsoever in 10 years. So this all came together in the perfect storm as we began to get into the really serious budget situations of 2010 that I was facing and putting together the 2011 budget.
Mayor Littlefield, you said to me that they were using all kinds of things. You said you signed the mayor's climate protection agreement, and you were accused of being against air conditioning.
Right. Yeah. This was at a gathering of Tea Party supporters, I suppose. It would be the only way to characterize it. It was called the Pachyderm Club, but everybody I saw there affiliated themselves with the Tea Party. And they peppered me with questions about the mayor's climate protection agreement. Did it sign away the ability of the city of Chattanooga, citizens of Chattanooga, to utilize air conditioning to drive their cars? And Chattanooga, I reminded them, was once the dirtiest city in America, and so we don't apologize for environmental measures that we have taken. But it just illustrated to me what issues that they were willing to dredge up to take against a mayor.
It's fair to say that the bone of contention for you was a federal mandated situation where you were under a court decree and you had to obey that, and your counsel went with you?
Well, to be fair and complete, yes, I had to raise taxes as well as these mayors did in order to do what you had to do to maintain the police force and things of that nature. But on top of that, we had a federal mandate to meet new water quality standards to deal with sewer overflows, combined sewer overflows, and to meet federal stormwater regulations. In fact, I pointed that out at one of the U.S. Conference of Mayors gatherings to some federal officials there, that I had done what was necessary to meet that mandate, and I had been treated to a recall election, which at that time it was just a petition that was beginning to circulate, for doing what they thought and I thought was the right thing to do.
Mayor Plusquellic, your threshold was rather low. I mean, the film shows that you had 270,000 voters, 3,200 could put you in a recall situation. Mayor Plusquellic, many of you might not know this, but he's been in the newspaper since he was 13 years old. He's had 38 years at the local level, but he was a star quarterback all of his life. So everybody knows who Don Plusquellic is, and everybody knows that Don Plusquellic is a tough guy. And we jokingly said, well, you know, on a given Friday night, you could find 3,000 people just absolutely pissed off at him and sign a recall. So, but the threshold to me in your situation was a certain percentage of the last election, and there are no Republicans running in that general election. So your threshold was very low. Can you talk about that? Are you doing anything to change that or make your citizens aware of it?
Well, it's one of the points that you made to mayors over the last couple of years and did on the film, that one of the first things people ought to look at in this atmosphere we have, where my 38 years in this public business, it's the worst I've ever seen. And I think we understand why, with all of the economic problems and difficulties, the angst, the dissatisfied people for whatever reason. Of course, they don't go to meetings, they don't read material to find out the real issues and difficulties. But with all of that, that we really should, as mayors, look at specifically the provisions in our case, in our charter, some's called a constitution or whatever, that establish the city basic laws on and even state provisions in some case, to look at what those provisions are. In our case, we hadn't looked at it, hadn't thought about it, but it was such a low threshold, and it was based on the number of voters who had voted in the last mayoral general election, and I didn't have opposition. And only 2 out of our 10 ward council members had opposition. So guess what? Hardly anybody voted. And that's why the 3,100 number was so low. What we did, because I heard so much on the campaign trail when I was out at numerous meetings, that this was unfair, and even people who legitimately had some argument with me about some issue that as Tom had mentioned, I put a tax increase on in my election year. I didn't wait till afterwards. I put it on in the spring of my election year. Never imagined that people, when they said they wanted their politicians to be honest with them, would not actually want them to be honest with them. I was supposed to tell them everything was okay, which I wasn't about to do. I had put a tax on 4 years previously in my election, but it was for rebuilding our schools. And anyway, the low threshold was based on hardly anybody voting. So we went back to the voters. The special election was in June 2009. We went back to the voters immediately in November to change the charter. And it now is a percentage of the total number of voters. So regardless of whether it's a high or low turnout, it's the total number of voters that drives that. And by the way, in spite of what the person who's really obsessed with being mayor more than anything else that led this, it took them an extra 15 days to get just 3,100. He bragged that he had thousands and thousands of signatures. In our charter, you have the period of time, and he took 6 months to get those, and then couldn't get enough. And in our charter provision earlier, it gave you 15 more days to come up with a few hundred extra to get that.
I want to go to the Mayor of Omaha and just, we've talked about the actual cost of the election. I mean, it costs, when you have an election, we all have normal elections. We know that you have to pay for the facilities, and it's several $100,000. You get elected, and your job is to bring business, bring hotels, bring in tourism, bring in development. Can you speak to that, Mayor Suttle? I mean, what is the damage that it caused you when you felt like that you could have been improving your city rather than to deal with a recall that started 1 hour after you were sworn in?
Well, I had 2 things that I was focused on when I took the oath of office. One was bring stability to the city's finances, and I did that. And second, to create a forum for job creation, particularly in industrial-type jobs. During this recall, things got turned off at City Hall, as you would expect. They didn't know who was going to be the mayor. We lost grants that were coming our way. But the biggest thing I felt is we lost 60 days of business capital time. No one came to my office. But after I beat the recall, 1 week later, I've got 6 hotel groups. When hotels are not the thing to be investing in this country, they are in Omaha. 3 industries with 400, 500, and 400 jobs knocking at our door. 2 major mixed-use developments in the hundreds of millions of dollars and a major office complex. This is what I need to be spending my time on, and will continue the next 2 years.
Mayor Littlefield, you were in public service 17 years. Can you tell us the personal feelings you have about things that you saw and things that were said about you, and how did it affect your family?
Well, actually, I've been in elected office myself for 17 years, and I'm a city planner by background, so I've worked with about the last 5 mayors of Chattanooga, and as a city planner, I've worked with many other governments and been through a lot of elections as a result of that. But the environment, and particularly the blogging environment, where they can just say anything they wish with impunity, is something that I think could actually just unravel the democracy unless we find some way to contend with it. It's not democracy. People say, isn't it about democracy? Yeah, it's about democracy. But democracy was certain limits. Long time ago, we put limits on what you can say in an election, and that you have to have your name on it, and there are reasons for that, so that irresponsible things don't circulate. In the film, the individual was quoted there as saying, you know, things just go out there and they begin to circulate electronically. Well, it was just the nastiest, most vile material. And I have two sons who both work in advertising and public relations. They're both professionals in that field. And they don't live in Chattanooga, but it was hard on them. One lives in Denver, one lives in Birmingham. And of course, they can monitor and keep up with all that stuff, and they didn't like what was happening to their daddy back in Chattanooga. And I know if I had known I was going into all of this, my wife would have insisted that I not run again for mayor. And that's the thing I think is most damaging and most frightening about this whole thing. I'm term limited. I've got about 2 years left, and people have been saying to me, because, you know, when you get in that position, you go around looking for a good candidate or a good few candidates to step up and run for office. And I'm hearing too many times people saying, well, you know, with all this going on, I just don't want to do it. We can't allow that to happen in cities across the country.
Mayor Suttle, you came to us in the middle of this crisis, and you and I had sort of a come to Jesus talk, and
a good Southern term.
yeah, it goes beyond the South. But I mean, tell us a little bit about your thoughts about what a mayor should do. I mean, what kind of press person should they be? Have a nice person that can write real well, or do you get a blogger that's just as tough as they are? What kind of ammunition? What kind of defense and offense do you think that mayors should have when they start after you in the social media?
Well, when I reflect back on from the moment we were all smiling with the news that I had won the election, we were focused on going forward. We were focused on how do we put together in a matter of 30 days a cabinet and put together a staff and all the other things that are necessary to be a good mayor and get going with your agenda. The first thing is we didn't look at our backside. And I think every mayor should be doing that. What's going on behind you? Because there was a lot going on behind my back that I did not know about until it was too late into this process and damage had been done. Second is have a strong media person, your communication director. And we lost ours in 30 days, and we didn't replace that individual with a strong person who had a type A personality, a butt-kicker mentality when it comes to setting the tone and agenda of the message. And so our message was constantly getting lost in the blogs and other things. And third was maximizing, again, the social media, the Twitters and the YouTubes and all of those message media. Those are the three things that I think I would give as advice to existing mayors and future mayors.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this issue, as I say, is not going away. 2010, we went from 23 mayor recalls. We went for 2010 to 57, and I think it's going to continue. Mayor Plusquellic, do you have any thoughts about as we go to Baltimore for our annual meeting as to what we should talk to the new mayors about as we go forward as a past president of the organization?
Well, they first need to look at their specific charter provisions, because this is something that everyone around the country is talking about, and the malcontents that are always out there in every community. The people who are sort of underneath, many of them have their own personal agendas. In my case, it's an obsession with a couple of these people to become mayor, and I've just hung around too long. The provisions are very important to know and understand and figure out whether it's a simple matter of this low threshold. I think the second thing that the mayor just talked about was trying to figure out how to use the social media to your advantage. And I think that's a difficult thing. I mean, the first wave of this for me, being around many years, was Annenberg School of Journalism talking about using talk radio. And I remember saying to Mary Matlin, well, I think it was my dad who told me that you can't win an argument with a liar or a fool. Now, her response was, that's why I don't get in an argument at home with my husband. But when people on talk radio in their initial days, still today, can get on anonymously and make every accusation, and it goes out over the airwaves, it has an ability to affect people that if they heard the same person standing at a meeting or standing on a street corner, you know, the proverbial real free speech, they might look at that person and say, you know, he lives down the block from me. He just got out of prison. I remember him. He was the one that raped the woman in the back of a paddy wagon. He was a former employee that the mayor fired, and I know him. Well, when they say things anonymously, you don't really know who's behind that. So I don't know that there's a perfect way to use the social media, but you have to be as effective as you can, and given the limitations that the press, the media, the real press and the media have in today's world with cutbacks, to be able to really go in depth and be able to explain things and get people to understand, you have to get your message out. And I think that's the other session that I talked to you, that we really need to help mayors in today's world, which is different certainly than it was 40 years ago or 35 years ago, to really know and understand and know how to use that and be effective using it. And I think, you know, the last part is that you really need to understand when you come into this business the difficulty that you face, the problems, and know with your eyes open the tough time you're going to have in today's world. Because my opinion was that 20%, and you know, Tom mentioned about football, and I've told people, I played a sport where people are allowed to knock you down, and they got up the next play, they're allowed to do it again. So I understand competition. I understand, you know, sort of this whole thing about opponents and doing things. I learned that people hated me because I wore a red jersey and their team wore a blue jersey. And many of us can understand all of that. But the kinds of things that are going on right now and the undercurrent there, that years ago when I first started, everybody said you can take 20% of the people, they're going to be against everything, they're going to do everything they can to be negative. That number, my pollsters are telling me, is at least 35% now. So a third of the people out there are dissatisfied, they're mad, they're against anything that's proposed. They say they want change, but they don't really. And I think, you know, it's a personal commitment that people have to make, and new mayors especially, who come waltzing in, you know, especially if they've never been elected before. One of the things I always tell them is get ready, because I don't care what it is. There was an incumbent mayor that didn't listen to me and sort of went mamby-pamby walking through the tulips, and 3 years later, he didn't know what hit him, and he got 7% of the re-election vote when he ran for re-election, and he had not done anything wrong. He was not a crook. He didn't have a scandal. He just didn't sort of handle the day-to-day battle that you have to battle with some of these folks. So I think there are a number of things that mayors can learn from this. I tell you this, in Akron, many of my friends said, you know, this is going to be good for you. It's going to make you stronger. And I said, yeah, my heart operation in 2003 made me stronger, but some SOB ripped my chest open, and I didn't feel real good for a while. And that's kind of like what this recall whole thing has taught me is, yeah, it made me stronger politically, but I hope that people can learn from that. And in my case, you know, I wished I would have eaten, you know, dandelions my whole life before and not had that heart operation. But there's no way to change the trend right now in this country, and mayors have to know and accept what they need to do to fend this off to the best. And residents, by the way, I should say this, need to know and understand the phoniness behind many of these people who could give a hoot about the community. They're looking at their own personal interests. And let me say one last thing, if I could. The thread through many of these communities is a mayor had to make a tough decision. And people say they want their political people, their public officials, to do what's right, to tell them the truth, to do these things. And when they do, this undercurrent, these malcontents, use that to turn it on people. And it's really something that the public in this country, if they want our country to survive and be the strong country that we've been, we really need to deal with some really tough issues now. And the public needs to know and understand that mayors have to balance the budget. So when they have to lay off a police officer, I've said this, 2009 was the toughest year of my life, not because of the recall, because I had to lay off 38 firefighters who were totally innocent. They had done nothing wrong, except we didn't have the income to pay them, and I had to lay them off. And when you do that, there's no mayor in this country that gets a political advantage out of that. But to have to balance the budget every year, and that requirement that we take seriously, and we do it, and then have that turned on us by this 35% of the people that are always out there just trying to churn things up, create chaos and turmoil, I think is the tough thing for the American public to have to step back and think about. Do you want leaders that take the positions that are necessary to do the right thing for the community, or do you want to listen to these naysayers?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, let me just make a closing observation. As we sit here today, we know that the Congress and the President are, quote, cutting a deal. The last go-round was 16% cut in CDBG. So we know that there are cuts coming from Washington. We know that there are Republican and Democratic governors that are taking a tight look. And what is happening is it comes down from Washington, it comes down from the state capitals, and it comes straight into City Hall. And so as this great recession is still out there, where small businesses are still having problems with access to credit, and jobs are not as prevalent as we thought they would be, it all comes down to the fact that a decision by a mayor, an economic decision that he or his council votes to help his city can be a subject for a recall, not malfeasance, not corruption. So we will continue to bring this issue to our mayors and to let them know what is happening in America, and also use our organizations to educate them so that we can have less disruptive government and less cost to our taxpayers at the local level. So with that, stay tuned on this issue. We'll be in Baltimore in June for our 79th annual meeting, and we will continue to have this discussion as we go forward with new mayors and mayors that have been in the business for a while. So I'd like to now open it up with questions from the press. See if you have any questions of the mayors or myself. Yeah.
I'm Ryan Hollywell with Governing Magazine. So I guess I wanted to ask y'all, what's the fix for this? I mean, are you urging your state lawmakers to address this issue? Or are you going to be urging your fellow members to start making amendments to city charters? How do you want to deal with this issue?
Well, my responsibility, and I've been charged to do this, is to educate the mayors on the fact that they need to be aware of the statutes. In Chattanooga, you did have a double. You had a local ordinance and a state ordinance, right. And the court had both of those. So it is a question of state and local law. But I'm just saying, look at your statutes and see what the threshold is. I mean, when you look at Mayor Suttle, he comes in. We take him up to the Kennedy School. We say, oh, make sure you have a nice inauguration, open up City Hall, and get the bands there, get the choral group there, and celebrate. 1 hour later, when he goes home with his family, the block is hit. So as he just said, you've got to watch your back. And that is just a fact in a world where, Fox News, it looks like Walter Cronkite compared to these bloggers. So maybe some of the mayors can talk about this.
I'd like to answer the question a little differently. So many decades ago, Senator Everett Dirksen said to his committee after the November elections, gentlemen, you're no longer Republican senators and Democrat senators. You are United States senators, and we are here about the people's business. Now let's get on with it. We've forgotten that. There's no such thing as a Republican pothole and a Democrat pothole and a shortfall in the pension plan that is Republican or Democrat. These are horrific problems. So the day before the recall election, they're there. The day after the recall election, they're still there. So we are running away from our problems as a people, and we have got to get back to the people's business. Mayors know how to do that, and we're on the front line of solving problems, and we're going to continue to do that. And we need to continue doing the right thing and not being intimidated by these wealthy few who want us to do the wrong thing.
Well, first of all, I think that there should be more specific laws, rules, and regulations about what you can be recalled for. And in Tennessee, in my case, you could be recalled because they didn't like the way you parted your hair or anything, whatever. Didn't have to have a reason at all. Well, then there are laws for removal from office, and I think those are, everyone understands that. If you're doing something illegal or grossly unethical, you will be removed from office. And I think that there needs to be some uniformity and specifics about that. The second thing is I think the recall movements need to be held to the same standard as any other campaign. In my case in Chattanooga, the people who were driving the recall movement, it was not under Tennessee law classified legally as a campaign. It was just some kind of a movement out there. And so they were spending money. They were obviously hiring people. They were doing all these things, and there was no record required of it. I don't think that's right, proper, legal. It shouldn't be legal.
Any other questions?
Let me follow up, though, one other thing. And I don't know how to suggest that we do this in this country because the press is free to do what they choose. But in my case, and I think it's true in most places of the country, there's sort of an attitude that these bloggers and all this, it's kind of like people who like to watch big-time wrestling or mud wrestling or a whole lot of other analogies I could use or examples. It's kind of fun. You know, this is a big time. Look at this guy. He looks pretty powerful, and he's been around 17 years. It's kind of fun to let people just slap him around a little bit. I mean, what the heck? What does it hurt? Well, I'll tell you what. I believe in my newspaper, they suddenly said, oh, you fill in the blank there. Crap. This is serious. I mean, I had a pretty good record. I'm recognized with a couple other magazines and some other things. We had won the All-America City Award the year before. We've been innovative and creative, done all kinds of things to lead the state. And here's this group, day after day, spreading lies. They used people, my family and friends' names that they bought on bought a domain name, and used that to look like it was my own family members or other people associated with me. They did everything imaginable, and I swear to God, when I used to try to explain it, I realized that after about 3 minutes, people thought I was crazy. Because you can't believe that people are that motivated to do that many dastardly, horrible things. But when you buy somebody's, and I'll just tell you, my former wife, when you buy her domain name, and Plusquellic's not exactly like a common name, when you buy her domain name to say things about me that she had nothing to do with, wanted nothing to do with, it's something that, in my opinion, in this country, the mainstream press needs to do something and have some responsibility. And we talked about it earlier. You know, most newspapers require you to sign your name, and most of them follow up the check to make sure you sent the letter to the editors. And that's a legitimate forum. People, you know, write their complaints, their problems, but the blogs afterwards, nobody checks those. I have a case where somebody filed against me in a deposition. This person admitted to 4. We know there's more. And he talks to himself. And when we asked about this specific name, he said, well, I might have used that name. This is an individual that would have been a friend of mine. I mean, those things are going on right now, and it undercuts the ability of our residents in this democracy where the information, the reason that you're so protected is that we believed, I wasn't around back then actually, but the framers of the Constitution, believed that it was important that people were able to voice their opinion and be able to write things and inform the people. In my opinion, that's your biggest job and task. You have other tasks. You can entertain and other things, but to inform people in a democracy is one of the most important building blocks for having a democracy survive and last. And that's being undercut. And I don't know exactly how to do it. I know that the most recent effort by the Annenberg School of Journalism, partnering with St. Petersburg Times, I think it is, to do something called PolitiCheck, where they take people like us, and if we, just somehow use the wrong number in a statement, boy, they'll go after us and say, well, that's not true. But these folks get away with this on the blogs on their own owned site. And it just seems to me it's undercutting the whole democratic process. So I'm not sure how to go from there to say what it is your responsibility is, but it seems to me that's a big part of it, that before we get to this point, that people can lie straight out and tell things that are so absolutely absurd that we need to fend that off somehow, and you folks really are the people that over the years have done that.
Thank you, Mayor. We, this organization will continue to have this issue in front of us, recognizing that we're on the front line dealing with these hard economic issues, and we also realize we have more anger in America than we've had in a lifetime. So thank you very much. We appreciate you helping us bring this story to Washington, D.C. We will continue to speak on all of our mayors who are facing recalls, who are facing tough decisions, and have to get up every day and with their families and their staff do the best that they can. Thank you very much for being here.
Could I do one other thing?
Yeah.
though? This is I want to introduce someone who you could talk to if you want to know what really happened in the good old days. Paul Helmke, former mayor of Fort Wayne, was around before the internet, before the telephone,
Before
a lot of those
newspapers.
things, and he can give you what it was like in the real old days when people were honest. Just in case you need that perspective.
Thank you.